In the 2016 election cycle, America was flipped on its head after expecting an election result dramatically different from President Trump's victory. In fact, only 1 out of 20 major polls headed into Election Day 2016 gave Donald Trump a likely victory, with many polls suggesting a 99% chance of a Clinton presidency. Forbes magazine has since found the common reality of major political polls in modern America is this: a sizable majority of left-leaning voters are polled, while conservatives make up only a minority of the sample. This reality leads to false poll results and therefore false expectations by the American people going into a presidential election. Why the sample population in a poll lacks necessary ideological diversity to produce an accurate result could be attributed to many reasons, but one thing is clear: polls are untrustworthy and their results are unreliable.
The simple answer is polls are accurate. They're scientific. They've been done the same over decades, and their accuracy really has not changed over that time. Even though 2016 was in fact quite an upset, that doesn't necessarily prove that polls are inaccurate. 538, the most reputable polling website in the country, still gave Donald Trump an 18% chance of winning right before election night. So there was a chance that Donald Trump would win, as the polls showed. We anticipated a possibility of it, but that doesn't mean that polls in general are wrong. If you look at 2018, polls mostly predicted that Democrats would sweep the House and take back control. And if you look ahead to 2020, they're showing that President Trump still has a chance to win, but Joe Biden simply has a larger one. It's important to remember that just like with global warming, polls are a science. And it's important that we don't question science when there's a clear consensus around it, simply for partisan gain.
I'm David Grasso, and you're watching Bold TV. Today's hot button issue, polls. How trustworthy are they? Let's hear from our panelists. First, we have Nate Lerner. He's the executive director of Building the Wave. And joining him is Isabel Brown. She's a Turning Point USA spokesperson. Welcome to you both. So, Isabel, let's start off with you. Do you trust most polls that you see, or do you just lack complete faith in them?
Well, David, thank you so much for having me, first of all. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity for actual debate to take place between two different sides. And I appreciate that Bold TV is making an effort to have that happen in Generation Z and in the millennial generation as well. Well, if you had asked me this question just a few years ago going into the 2016 election, I would have told you I had complete faith in political polling. Polling is often referred to as a science, which we heard in Nate's opening statement. But the 2016 election really turned that situation on its head and provided an opportunity for Americans to see the reality of science. It's not perfect at the end of the day. In 2016, only 1 out of 20 major polls going into Election Day predicted that Donald Trump even had a likely opportunity to win the election. Most of the polls suggested that Hillary Clinton had a 70 to 99% chance of becoming the president of the United States. And obviously, we know that that's not true today. The way that polls are conducted is not a perfect science. They often are purchased from commercial lists, and we're not even sure if the people being surveyed are current voters or if they're registered to vote. And that therefore often leads to false information and false expectations by the American people.
So, Nate, what do you have to say about this? You know, a lot of the ways we collect polls are flawed, and I think we can agree that much. But does that mean that they hold absolutely no veracity, no weight in predicting elections?
Yeah, I think polls hold a great deal of weight, and to say otherwise is incredibly false. Saying that Donald Trump's election disproved the effectiveness of polls is like pointing to a cold day in the summer and saying that disproves climate change. It's absolutely outrageous. We've been doing polls for decades now, and studies have shown that they have just as much accuracy as they always have. Polling methods have been updated over the years to reflect new voters, to reflect increases in cell phones, less use of landlines. Polling is a massive industry where there's a great deal of science, there's a great deal of money involved in being accurate. And if you fall behind in polling, you get dropped for a better firm. It's capitalism at its finest. I'm sure Isabel can appreciate that. And I think the narrative that the right wants to send is that don't believe the polls. Donald Trump has a chance this year. He's going to win. He wants his base to feel excited, not feel like moderate Republicans are abandoning him en masse. But the truth is the polls are right. He is currently losing by quite a bit to Joe Biden nationwide.
Yeah, so Isabel, let's talk about that. The president is behind right now in polls, and of course the election isn't tomorrow or anything like that. But do you feel like the president has a good chance of winning in the fall, or are you going to look at these polls and take the threat seriously?
I absolutely believe the president will win re-election in November. He has record high approval within the Republican Party and a substantial amount of approval with independent voters across America as well. But Nate, I do want to touch on something that you just mentioned, that polls have been done for decades and their effectiveness and accuracy has been noted for decades in the United States of America. But polling inaccuracy is not a new issue in the United States. In 1948, the polls were so sure that Thomas Dewey would win the presidential election that nearly every major newspaper in the United States of America put out a print issue saying that Dewey won the presidential election, when in fact we know that Harry Truman actually won the presidential election. So the accuracy has always been fluid throughout the entire situation of polling in the United States. And you also mentioned that our updating the policies of how we collect polling samples throughout the United States is helping the accuracy. But in reality, it's not. UCLA's Business Magazine recently ran an article from a polling expert which talks about how polling is less accurate now because individual polling companies and major media outlets are actually soliciting from commercial lists instead of creating their own lists because it's easier, cheaper. They can lower the number of journalists on their staff, and ultimately it just allows them to put out polls more quickly and more effectively, no matter what the accuracy of those polls might look like.
Nate, what do you have to say to all of that?
Well, I think pointing out the Dewey versus Truman election isn't really a great example since that happened 80 years ago. So I think, you're pointing out anecdotal evidence. You're quoting one expert. When you look at polls en masse, which multiple studies have done, they show that they're still just as accurate as they've always been. You're always going to have exceptions. You're always going to have margins of error. Polls literally account for that. So it overall, when you look at the data, it clearly shows a trend of accuracy. And I do want to get back to the point that, against Turning Point USA, I think it's really important to note their entire motive and goal is to argue that Donald Trump can win and to defend him. They're not interested in actually looking at the science. They're not interested in actually looking at the facts. They're interested in making a point and making an argument for Donald Trump. So I think it's important to take that when hearing these arguments. When the actual science, the actual math, the actual data, it shows that Donald Trump is losing. It shows that polls are just as accurate as always. And you don't need to take my word for it. There's a lot of data backing that up.
Yeah,
I find your characterization of Turning Point USA really interesting, actually. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we don't align with any particular political party or candidate running for office, while Students for Trump is a similar organization operated by the 501c4 Turning Point Action. They're not affiliated with Turning Point USA, and I really have no stake in the game to make sure that the president wins in the fall anyway. What we're aiming to do is actually look for the reality and the facts of the situation. And being a scientist myself in biomedical sciences with a master's degree from Georgetown University, I noticed that you mentioned in your opening statement we should never question the science of polls because the science is concrete. But shouldn't we always question science if we're really interested in learning the truth?
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, I followed that up with when there's partisan motives. This is just like with climate change. It's just like with COVID-19, where you have different political motives that are involved. When you have clear scientific consensus on an issue, and someone from a different side who is motivated by profit, motivated by political gain is saying otherwise, I think it's pretty clear who to side with. We see that with vaccines as well. So that's simply the argument I make. But I do agree that we should obviously audit and question science as much as possible. But we also have to be aware of the motives of those who are encouraging us to do so. And I think this is a very clear example of that being the case. And there are plenty of 501c3s that are very political on both sides.
So I have a question for both of you. One of the things that I've been most disappointed with as an adult is discovering that there are liberal and conservative judges, and now there are liberal and conservative polling firms. Why do polling firms have a partisan orientation? Shouldn't they just be in the business of getting numbers? Why are some polling firms known for being liberal and others known for being conservative? So tell me, Isabel, why do you think so?
Yeah, David, that's a great question. And it sort of goes back to something that Nate just touched upon in his last response, that there is a motive, often partisan motive, behind certain results in science. And when we look at polling specifically, I believe that inaccurate polling results, which almost always invariably lead to the left and don't allow a conservative individual to prove that they're going to win an election up front, is to drive voter behavior, particularly with voters who aren't as educated, who don't understand the issues, so to speak, and who maybe haven't done all the research on a candidate. So perhaps it's an opportunity for polling companies and partisan media outlets to try to drive voter behavior, especially for younger voters.
So, Nate, but I've heard the same argument on the right. There's certain polling firms that are known for, being nicer to conservative candidates, right?
Yep, and the great thing about that we see in the media is that they usually note that if that's the case, they'll say this polling firm is typically associated with the left or the right. That's completely the case. I mean, if you're on a campaign, you can release a poll that makes you look good. It's very easy to do. I've done that. But there are clear firms they're clear polling operations that are completely nonpartisan. You have the media doing it. You have Fox News conducting polls showing Donald Trump losing. You have Fox News conducting polls showing Republicans losing the House in 2018. At the end of the day, yes, there are left and right, but there's also plenty in the middle. It is a business. So if you want to help Republicans look good and you want to help Democrats look good, there are firms that will do that for you. But the media tends to report the ones that are right in the middle and are nonpartisan, and they'll know otherwise.
Yeah, so guys, I want to end this on this note. So we heard from you, Isabel, you think the president has a fair shot of winning. You don't trust the polls. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay, and Nate, for you, you think the president's going to lose, that Joe Biden has a really large chance of winning in November?
I think it's Joe Biden has a good chance of winning. I think all things being equal, he wins. If mail-in voting is allowed, if there's no interference from Russia, he wins. But I think I would watch out for Republican voter suppression to try to stop that. That's a much bigger concern on my end.
Well, I want to thank you both for being incredibly civil to each other, and thank you for taking the time to talk to Bold TV.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for watching. Have a great day.